you bring up energy security. And so I'm going to butter you up a little bit before we get into a big disagreement about NATO and Ukraine and all that, because I do want to talk about geopolitics a little bit. But I think this actually plays into your motif more than anything else, which is globalization. It's the idea, oh yeah, we can buy our electricity from this, and we can buy our steel from that, and we can buy, and before you know it, Germany's importing its gas from Russia. And even if the West wanted to do something there, I mean, you're being held hostage.
Yeah. The just-in-time supply chain. Don't vote Brexit or you'll destroy the just-in-time supply chain. Well, the just-in-time supply chain suits giant multinational global corporations, but does away with any concept of nation, does away with any concept of a common good for a collective group of people in that nation. And this has been very much exposed. The German thing's incredible. I mean, utterly incredible. There they were, saying Brexit was funded by the Russians, Trump, is in Putin's pocket. It was Germany all the time. I mean, they've made themselves wholly dependent. And that, of course, means that our threat of sanctions against Putin are completely and utterly hollow and meaningless because he can hurt the West far more than we can hurt him.
So let's talk about geopolitics. Now, look, I've just written a book called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, and it's mainly about why I think what we have here is actually pretty good and we should stop beating ourselves up about it. But part of my argument is the more we focus internally, the more time we spend talking about, this comedian made this joke and now we're all very upset for 3 days and whatever, the more we take eye off the ball. And that's why China is expanding into the South China Sea. It's getting bullish on Taiwan. You see what's happened in Hong Kong. And Russia likewise, do you think the West needs to rediscover its kind of ability to project power around the world? Because you seem concerned that NATO is expanding eastwards and all of that.
Look, I think we've made some massive geopolitical mistakes since 1990. The Berlin Wall had come down and we decided that NATO and the European Union would expand ever eastwards. Empires that are struggling for a role continue expanding. It's a good way of keeping going.
I know you just go into your answer, and I never interrupt guests generally, but let me just put a small counter argument. The reason NATO is expanding eastwards is because Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Ukraine feel terrified, rightly so, because only 70 years ago the Soviets invaded, massacred their elites, took over their country. They don't want that to happen again. It's not some bureaucrat in Brussels that's making that happen. It's those countries fearing for their survival.
Just because they want to join doesn't mean it's a clever geopolitical move for us to say yes.
I'm saying the motivation for expansion is not.
Look, if I was Polish, I would have wanted to join NATO. If I was Polish, I'd have crossed my fingers and voted to join the European Union, probably. I get that. But let's just let's just go back a bit further. Go back over the last couple of 100 years of the formal existence of nation states around the world. The concept of a buffer zone is actually quite an intelligent concept, okay? In the case of NATO, this ever eastwards expansion has been a deliberately provocative move against a Russia which has always been paranoid. The Cold War, Russia was far more scared of us than we were of Russia.
True.
And sometimes, if you want to resolve a conflict, right, sometimes what you have to do is to put yourself in the mind of the other person. It's rather like solving that crossword puzzle. You've got to think, whoever wrote this, what were they hinting at? So we know Russia's paranoid. We know that the old traditional, encirclement idea, invasion idea of Russia is something that motivates them very deeply. By the way, I don't doubt for a moment that Putin does have expansionist tendencies. However, here we are as we sit here today with 130,000 Russian troops massed on the border. He's making one key demand, which is that we say that the Ukraine will not join NATO, okay? We have Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, Boris Johnson, some woman called Liz Truss who's become Foreign Secretary, God knows how, but anyway, there we are. And they're all saying, no. If the Ukraine wants to join NATO, they can. I suggest right now we say Ukraine will not be joining NATO. We do understand the concerns in Moscow about ever eastward expansion. It has come to an end, and we now ask President Putin to stand his troops down on that border. We remove from him his casus belli. We take away from him any possible reason that he could have to mount an invasion. And we remember that by not doing this earlier, we've driven Putin into the arms of the communist Chinese government. How blooming stupid can we possibly be? There is no advantage or interest to us in Ukraine joining NATO. If we make this concession at this stage in the aim of bringing peace, do you know something? It might just work.
Nigel, what would you say a few years down the line when Russia takes the rest of Ukraine, which it will do?
Well, if you want us to go to the Third World War, if you want them to join NATO and send British troops there, that's fine. I mean, look. I am not saying absolutely I have a cast iron guarantee that I can stop the outbreak of war in the Ukraine. What I can say, I think I've got a much brighter idea than anybody else who are sticking to the same formula they've had for 30 years, which I believe to be a geopolitical mistake. And one of the reasons I say this is in 2014, we had the Orange Revolution in Kiev. Do you remember all the people in the square who were part of that coup that brought down a democratically elected leader of the Ukraine?
Yeah, that's where you're starting to lose
Maybe
me.
a corrupt country.
Yeah.
He may have been a corrupt guy, but he was a democratically elected leader, brought down by people in the squares in Kiev, waving European Union flags, because the European Union had pumped in pre-accession aid, and it was the stated aim that they wanted Ukraine to join the European Union. Far from being an organisation that guarantees peace in Europe, I think where we are today was provoked in large part actually by Brussels and its expansionist tendencies. We've made some big mistakes here. And I made those arguments back in 2014 to be condemned by everybody that somehow I was Putin's puppet. I'm not. I just think sometimes that concept of buffer states is actually a brighter thing to do than the line that we've been pursuing.
Here's where I think there's a flaw in your argument, with all possible respect, of course.
I'm sure there is one, but that's fine.
I think the flaw in your argument is if what we need is a buffer zone, why? And if Russia is so desperate to have a buffer between itself and NATO, why is Russia expanding westwards?
Because he sees an historic coming together of the Russian peoples and all the rest of it.
Right.
And we have to make it clear to him.
There's some historical parallels there.
Well, let's take away from him any possible excuse he can have, any validation he can have. Firstly, with his own population, and secondly, with all the rest of us. I think it's the right thing. So, what would you like to do? So Ukraine joins NATO. That's your
I'm not necessarily suggesting that Ukraine should join NATO.
Okay.
I think what I see is in the broader geopolitical. That's why I brought China into this.
Yeah.
The West is weak and it's showing weakness.
Fine. Well, we saw that in Kabul last year, didn't we?
Right. And the people who, and you'll understand this because you understand how the real world works. In the West we talk about equality and diversity and well, whatever. In the real world, people don't operate on that basis. They operate on land, money, finance, weapons, technology, espionage, right?
Oil, water,
exactly.
all these things.
Kindness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Human rights. So what this looks like from the outside to me, as I look at it from a non-Western perspective, is the West is distracted, the West is weak, and all the things that we would have quite liked to have done, right? If you're China, well, yeah, you want to expand this way and you want to take over Hong Kong and you want to do this. So from my perspective, it depends on what people in the West want. If you want the managed decline of the West, this is what you're going to get.
I have a feeling if Donald Trump was in the White House, we wouldn't see little rocket man firing off all these rockets. I don't think China would be quite as bellicose about Taiwan as they are.
That's my point.
And I mean, look, Biden has been a catastrophe. The unilateral withdrawal from Afghanistan was a complete disaster.
Right.
And far from America is back, they've actually retreated away.
Clearly.
And the West is now without leadership.
But that's my point, Nigel. By advocating for the position you're advocating for, that's part of the same sort of, well, we just need to, appease these people. And instead of the West coming out and going, look, we are the world's superpower. We're not embarrassed about our values. Our values are better than yours, right? Freedom, democracy, these are all good things. And we are going to spread them around the world because this is who we are. And we are the strongest thing. If you think China and Russia, if they were the dominant hegemony in the world, they wouldn't do that. You're insane.
No, I know. I just see that being seen to make something of a concession right now, gaining the moral upper ground in this whole diplomatic standoff that is currently going on over the Ukraine, when, as I say, it's not in our interests for them to join anyway. If he still goes to war, he still goes to war. We'd then be much more united against him because we would have been seen to have done the right thing. As it is, we're carrying on with a policy that's a mistake.